Welcome to the Take It or Leave It podcast. I'm welcomed today by Dave from Purify.
Hi Nick, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Dave. Do you want to give us an intro to yourself?
Yeah, no problem. My name's Dave Jones. I'm the MD of a company called Purify Tech. And at Purify, we do three things really. We call them talk, meet and assist. And we're a Microsoft Gold partner and everything is around Microsoft Teams. So our talk service is around enabling Teams for telephony with contact center, call recording, all of those kind of good things. From a meeting room perspective, we also enable hybrid meeting rooms for customers, all sorts of large enterprise customers all across the UK and branching out worldwide now as well. And then the third thing we do is a thing called Assist, which is a little app that sits in Teams for adoption of Microsoft 365. So those are kind of three things that we do.
Cool, awesome. Thanks for the intro, Dave. So tell me, Dave, I'm curious, how has Power Apps, in your opinion, contributed to a more sustainable sort of business ecosystem?
Well, that's a great question. I think for me, one of the really untapped areas of the Microsoft 365 suite in general and also Power Apps is just how many organizations, when we look at enterprises and public sector, just how many people have got manual processes in their business. They're literally using the wrong product because they always have. So I'm sure you've seen this a lot, like Excel spreadsheets running entire businesses and people just emailing them around with different versions. We've got one customer that I'm not going to name, but the sensitivity of what they've got stored in an Excel spreadsheet is unbelievable. And they literally email it around to different people. And it needs to be a Power App or a list or something else. It's really kind of a major tool in how they work. And it's literally just done in an Excel spreadsheet. So I think there's so much more work to do. And from our perspective, it comes across as kind of adoption and from with your company, with Power Apps, it's just there's a lack of awareness, I think. I don't know how you feel, but I think there's a definite lack of awareness within the normal working life of businesses as to what can be done and how quickly it can be changed.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I was speaking with a client just yesterday who's in a very similar situation with their Excel spreadsheet. And one of the risks that they've identified is, the things hung together with formulas referencing other sheets, referencing other tabs. It's like you delete one of those formulas, that sort of Excel spreadsheet is thrown in the bin and we need to start again because nobody actually understands now how the thing was originally built, the skills have left the business.
Yeah.
So significant risk.
Absolutely. And I think that it's not just the fact that it's kind of the wrong technology. You see so many people using Excel as a prime example where, they're trying to build what is basically a database, but in Excel with a bunch of sheets. And like you say, the risks are that the whole business falls over if they can't get access, if that sheet becomes corrupt, or like you say, you've got one or two people in the business who really understand Excel to that level and understand what they've done. There's no documentation around what they've done and how they put it together. So to reverse engineer it's quite hard. And then those people can, not necessarily in a malicious way, but they're kind of put in positions of huge amounts of power because they've built this thing and the business really relies on it. So yeah, I think I wonder from your perspective, how easy is it to convince organizations to invest the money to change that into a more sustainable system?
Yeah, it's easier when I'm sharing the risk with them.
Yeah.
As business owners, our job is to try and reduce risk as much as possible. If I'm sharing with a client the potential catastrophes that could happen as a result of their Excel spreadsheet no longer being workable or, as you mentioned, becoming corrupt, I think that sort of scares them into opening the wallet up and thinking, actually, I'm going to put some investment into this before it comes back and bites me, and then I've got to pay to clear it up as opposed to do a proactive investment.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, I guess there's probably always been a bit of hesitancy around investing in software because this idea of if you're investing in software from a code base upwards, full fat software, if you like, rather than Power Apps, then that comes at a huge amount of cost. There's potential delay, there's people, that's what, as a business owner, I'd be worried about somebody who's creating custom software for me. It's like, okay, well now I'm going to be tied to an organisation that's going to charge me a fortune to maintain it and keep it going and all of those things. I think it's still not very well understood in the marketplace the sort of sweet spot that Power Apps really fits, which is, it's sort of like, the way I explain it to customers is, it's a bit like kind of macros on steroids. You know, you can build something, you've got all these building blocks that Microsoft have given you, and the concept from a Microsoft perspective obviously is that it's kind of citizen development, isn't it? That individuals can do that. So your kind of key kingpins who are, you know, your Excel whiz kids could maybe transition into Power Apps. But I don't know, I think you and I realise that that's a little bit far down the line. That's a lot to expect of somebody in a business who's got a day job to do, especially to start something from scratch. But yeah, I don't know, what do you think about Microsoft's kind of ambition of like citizen development?
Yeah, I love the question. I think it's getting better, but you're absolutely right, it's not quite there yet. I think Copilot's going to be a massive accelerator for the citizen developer journey. But so what we're seeing is with some of our clients is that we're helping retrain some of their administrators that no longer need to spend weeks messing around with Excel spreadsheets to build Power BI reports. So we're trying to handhold our clients on this citizen development journey with ourselves sort of sliding back into second and third line support.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, for me, if I was to be buying a sort of Power App style development, then I think there are certain things that within our business people could do. But when you're starting a project, you need all of that experience, don't you? You know that you're going to get so far down a road with a new software tool or something and think, oh, I wish I'd started in a different place. I wish I'd known that, you know, this module was better configured like that or whatever. And I think that's definitely the expertise and experience that working with somebody like Limitech could give you. And I think that's a really interesting way of, you know, instead of providing complete outsourced software development, is kind of sitting in with those growing citizen development dev teams in businesses to kind of offer them support and engagement and advice, because you guys have been there before, haven't you? And I bet there's a load of stuff that's like you need to know and you only find out through experience.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One thing off the back of what you're just saying there, some of our clients are coming to us for is governance. So they want their citizen developers, boots on the ground, to go nuts and create as many apps as they want, but they want them to do so in the relative safety of, well, if the person leaves the business, who can
that documentation and handover and all
exactly
that.
Who can be the owner of the app now? So we've had clients much more interested in our centre of excellence, in the centre of excellence and our governance piece, so helping them create a really solid foundation for them to build off the back of, so that a central IT governance team can still have oversight of which apps are being created, thinking about consumption, because it ultimately costs, thinking about premium licensing, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
I think that's really interesting. I think governance more generally is fascinating, especially when, you mentioned Copilot earlier on, and there are so many different Copilots from Microsoft now, aren't there? There's the Power Apps one, there's one in Microsoft 365, and there's so much hype and excitement about Copilot, and it can do incredible things, but you then look at the majority of customers that we work with, and their business process is nowhere near ready. Copilot can do some clever stuff with their email for sure, but if you're talking about actually changing processes and how the business operates, that thinking is not necessarily that mature in a lot of businesses in terms of, I think there's a huge role for kind of governance, business analysis, thank you. So that kind of business analysis thing is really, really important, and understanding those process flows, but what can be done. And I feel like a lot of organisations are kind of trying to jump down this Copilot route and thinking it's going to save huge amounts of time and deliver a massive change. And it definitely can do. But I think you need to know what you're aiming for. What process are you trying to improve? And there's so many steps before you need to get everything ready in a certain number of steps before Copilot can be potentially as useful as you want it to be, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely right. Sort of like start with the end in mind. Because if you don't have that, you're never going to be able to feed the right information into Copilot to get what you're after out.
And also, I think that understanding of, in the organisations that we work with are typically kind of 1,000 seats to 10,000 seats. And in those organisations, it's very difficult to get an organisational view of practically what's going on. And you might have like an absolutely killer process or team who are doing things in a really dynamic, innovative way. But then to take that innovation and to roll it out across the rest of the organisation is really, really difficult. And I think that's where our interest comes from a kind of adoption perspective. It's like, okay, if we've got a few people who've been doing some amazing things, how do we elevate those people in an organisation and share that best practice and make it much wider, and make those organisations perform a lot better wholesale?
Yeah, spot on, Dave. So thinking about sort of companies that we're talking about making efficiencies, you have the benefit of seeing a lot of different industries in the work that you do. Which industry would you say specifically needs to focus on efficiencies?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for us, it's going to sound a little bit cliched, and I don't mean it to sound bad, but I think there's a huge amount of efficiency across public sector generally that can be found. I think the private sector are generally better because they're constantly looking at the bottom line, looking for efficiencies. I think certainly local gov, NHS as well. For me, it feels like absolute madness, a lot of the way the NHS works. My wife's a nurse practitioner. She works in GP surgery, but she's also worked in hospitals and things in the past. And you just look at the way that how many people are involved, what the process is like from a paperwork perspective. It's absolutely mental, and there's got to be. And I know that there have been so many sort of attempts at this kind of whole-scale, large view of patient records and stuff in the NHS. And I think that those kind of projects are A, really, really difficult to deliver, and B, exceedingly costly with like the really big players in the market. Yeah. Huge projects that are always over budget, always delayed. And I think there's a massive opportunity for power apps within the NHS, actually at a kind of grassroots ground level, looking at an individual small process, improving it, moving on, improving it, moving on, and building it from the ground up. I think it's really fertile ground. One of the things that really, really surprises me, I think, with certainly on the GP side, I've been talking to my wife about quite a lot, is it's difficult to get a GP appointment, but then when you have your appointment with the GP, they're busy typing up the notes and things, but you leave with nothing. You've got to remember it.
Yeah.
And you've had a busy day, you go in, or people of all sorts of stages of walks of life, older people. And one of the things that I think is crazy is that you leave that appointment and you come back and you speak to another family member at dinner time and say, what did the doctor say? I've got literally no idea.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Or you misremembered something.
So you've got no access to your patient records.
You've got no access to your patient records. You can't see the GP's notes. But more than that, you'd think that there should be a way where a GP could literally just kind of type a few notes and then send a few different pieces of information. We discussed this, that, and the other. It's like any kind of agenda, isn't it? You have a meeting, you have an agenda, you have your minutes afterwards, hopefully. You have something good to. But we know that when you have a business meeting and you don't have an agenda and you don't have meeting minutes afterwards, nobody can remember what was agreed in the meeting. So there should be a real opportunity with just stuff like that to maybe send out a text message at the end of the consultation saying this is what you've done. I know this is not necessarily Power App related, but there's so much in the NHS where it's like, no, we don't. You get your letter through the post for your appointment. It's really, really antiquated, and we think about sustainability as well. Just the amount of letters sent by the NHS in the UK. There's got to be a carbon saving there. Printing it out, sticking it in an envelope, the carbon of actually posting it and it being delivered is mental.
100% agree.
So I think definitely NHS is a key area. I know there's some good work going on in the NHS central tenancy within Microsoft. I think that's run by Accenture, but there is some kind of citizen development stuff going on in the NHS for Power Apps, and I know that they're trying to get different trusts and different kind of organisations from the NHS to bring their ideas. There was one that we worked on a little while ago, wasn't it, together, from a Power Apps perspective about equipment and just kind of the equipment maintenance. I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely, because that was a perfect sort of use case where the NHS was already bought into an existing technology and they didn't have scope to change that technology, but to extend the technology to do what they wanted to it was a high code application, so it was going to incur significant cost. So they didn't want to pay for those costs. But they still had a use case of, we still need our engineers to update the records when they've gone out and serviced a piece of equipment or done some pre-preventative maintenance. So we talked about, well, let's create them a nice little front-end mobile app that just integrates with the existing software's data set so that they can update their records following a visit.
Especially with that customer, they bought an expensive proprietary solution to do this, medical testing of equipment in the hospital, but it couldn't give job sheets out to those engineers, those technicians on a kind of on an app or in a way that they could consume it. So then it turned out to be somebody's pretty much full-time job of extracting information from this legacy system, wrangling it in Excel to create a job sheet for an engineer to do every day. And then it falls back to Excel, doesn't it, all the time?
Yeah.
And you just think this is not the most efficient way of doing this, and it's probably replicated across all sorts of trusts all over the country. The opportunity generally with Microsoft 365 in terms of process improvement and also with Power Apps, before we even get to Copilot, there's so much untapped opportunity and so many efficiencies. I think efficiencies is always, there's a connotation, isn't there? We're talking about efficiencies in the public sector. It means we're going to cut jobs, it means we're going to do things on the cheap, it means we're not going to spend money. But actually efficiencies in the way that you can deliver a process should make it better for everybody. Makes your job more fun. Nobody wants to sit and wrangle Excel for a living and just have a really bumpy, difficult process that involves 6 people to sign something off or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can find another word apart from efficiencies, but it's just improvements, isn't it? Rather than efficiencies, it's just like, how can we improve things? How can we make it better for our staff?
You've hit the nail on the head there in terms of their staff. And I think just to go off piste a little bit, a problem with the NHS is that it's been really geared up towards helping make their staff more efficient and their staff. Well, I think about the consumers of the service. So the people that are using the NHS, people that are coming in for a doctor's appointment. And you rightly said, well, when you walk away from that doctor's appointment, how am I, as somebody that's just attended that appointment, supposed to relay this information to my family and friends, given I was given it in a 5-minute explanation, summary at the end of my appointment, and it usually contained a lot of words that I didn't necessarily know or understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, by not adhering to, so if you get a prescription or something and, there's a regime, obviously you get it from the pharmacist, but if you don't really understand what it is that you're doing, you don't adhere to that regime, then the situation gets worse. You go back to the doctor and they say, well, did you do these things? Well, I forgot that's what I was supposed to do. And it's taking up an extra appointment, people are not getting better. There's so many things, aren't there?
And I think that's because, like you were saying, the viewpoint is from the staff's perspective. How can we make the staff more efficient? But I think it needs to be reframed to think about how can we ensure that the consumers of the service are getting what they should be. Are we making it easy for people to do this? Are we making it easier for people to do that? Well, we're certainly trying to make it easier for the staff, but the boots on the ground people that are using the service on a daily basis also need consideration.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it needs to be looked at in the round, doesn't it? From a whole kind of process perspective. What people
the customer journey.
The customer journey, which it's a very oft used phrase, isn't it? And I think people just think it's very much, that feels like a kind of e-commerce-y thing to say rather than an NHS-y thing to say. But it's the same thing, isn't it? It's how can certain things need to happen, how can we process them as effectively, and how can we give a good experience to the people that work for us and the people who are consuming the service.
We care intimately about our users, so we think about the people that are going to be holding the app that we're going to be developing. What are they thinking as they're interacting with our app? We try and really get under the skin of our users, and what we find is that just increases our chances of the solution's success.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that comes down to, I guess, a little bit around change management, doesn't it? If you've developed something and users feel like they're consulted and actually it is making things better for them, then it's a lot easier to adopt than somebody just wheeling in, oh, by the way, we're moving from package A to package B.
No rationale.
It's like, I don't know, I always think of it a bit like when you used to go, I'm showing my age, I suppose, but when you used to go to the travel agent and book a holiday, the user interface that the travel agents were working on to book flights was absolutely horrendous. It was like...
It's like SAP, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that, just like kind of just green screen, all kind of command line, keyboard shortcuts, all this kind of stuff. But the people knew their way around it, and they were fast because they
Oh,
used
yeah.
that operation all the time, and they knew what the flights looked like and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, you switch that back through to what happens now, and we're all, the amount of time that we spend booking a holiday, whereas before you used to be able to go to a travel agent, I suppose there's more choice, but you used to be able to go to a travel agent and just like literally go in, 15 minutes later, come out having booked a holiday. And now you spend the amount of time you spend on booking.com or wherever you go online, TUI or whatever it is, there's so much choice, and it's hours in January for us.
Yeah, I know.
We always book holidays.
Because you've got to look at every other site.
You think, am I getting a better price?
Yeah.
You know, all of that. And yeah, it's fascinating, I think, how things have changed, but not always for the better, I guess. But I think that kind of change management, if you can deliver something that's really, really key to those users and they feel that experience that it's going to be better for them, then it's a lot easier than rolling out, you know, just some generic system. And that engagement, I guess, that you're going to get, or you do get with your customers at that level, and the fact that they can have some equity in the solution, I guess. You know, they're designing how the buttons look, how the app looks, what does what. Then it's not going to feel so much that it's done to them, but they're consulted with, and it's a kind of custom solution that's developed for them.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
So Dave, we were just talking about the NHS and how they could become more efficient using the Power Platform. What out there in the wild, what examples have you seen of Power Apps transforming companies? And what advice would you have for any company that's thinking about taking up the Power Apps journey?
I think the advice thing is probably straightforward. I mean, it's going to sound really cheesy on the podcast, but you need to kind of engage with somebody like Numitech. You need to kind of understand the art of the possible, I guess, and have that governance in place. I think before kind of rolling out those apps. I think the other thing is, you've already mentioned it earlier on, kind of, I guess, storyboarding that kind of customer journey. We've started to see in some procurement events and the way that different large government departments like DWP, for example, they are really kind of starting to think about storyboarding. So, you know, if I'm a citizen and I'm in this situation, you know, sometimes it gets a bit flowery in terms of they give them a name and they, you know, all of this kind of stuff. But the understanding is good. The idea of, okay, so if I'm in this situation, how can I get my benefits changed, or how can I get back into work, or whatever the process is, by giving somebody a name and an actor and thinking through and storyboarding it, then I think that's really, really key to avoid getting sucked into just changing one small part of the process rather than kind of an end-to-end. So I think that's some advice. In terms of where I've seen it work really well, I think it's still quite early. I haven't seen lots of great examples of Power Platform deployments that are developed in-house with system development like we've been talking about. I think analytics is probably quicker out the gate. So, you know, the Power BI stuff, there's so much data available in these organisations, and people are starting to understand the power of dashboarding. And I think, you know, when you used to look back at dashboards, maybe pre-Power BI, you know, Tableau and other products, they were super expensive. And now obviously Power BI is wrapped into lots of people's licensing from a kind of consumption of the report point of view, but generating reports is still relatively cheap and affordable. I think that's the area where I think there's been a marked improvement of people trying to understand their own data and make meaningful insights out of it. So I think that's probably, whenever we look at kind of the Microsoft marketing and general kind of in the tech bubble, what people are talking about, I think there's quite a long lag to what's actually being used in real life. And I think my experience is that those Power BI dashboards are kind of the stepping stone towards what's going to be a massive increase in the use of Power Apps.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Power BI is sort of like the low-hanging fruit for everybody, and it's almost double affected in the sense of I've already got the data there. I just need to make it more meaningful, and I need to tell stories through it using visualizations so that it can aid me to make better decisions. But at the same time, you know, I might have an administrator that's creating board reports currently in Excel that's taking 2 to 3 weeks out of their month to do that. And so it's twofold, that you get the data visualization's ability to make better decisions and the efficiencies internally.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also the final thing, I guess, on that is the ability to really easily combine data sets. So it's like, I've got some data here and I've got some data there. Previously, or still in lots of organisations, downloading big CSV files and then kind of wrangling them in Excel, like you said, to produce a board report. It's like, well, that surely can be automated and we can bring that into Power BI. So I think that's, like you say, the low-hanging fruit and the thing that is actually making a difference at the moment. And then I think there's some challenge around some literacy around making sure that the way that you display that data actually doesn't bring false meaning. I think that's quite key as well.
Yeah.
So that kind of data science element of it, of, okay, well, is this causation or correlation? Are we kind of visualizing something that's giving us a view that isn't necessarily accurate just through the way that we visualized it?
Yeah.
So I think some of that's really, really key and important as well, and that will come with a bit more time.
No, 100% agree. Thanks ever so much, Dave, for joining me on the podcast today. I'd like to end with something a little bit different, which might be from a show that people know about, but no copyright infringement, I promise. Dave, would you like to ask a question of our next guest?
Okay, thanks, Nick. So my question is, what do you think about artificial intelligence and Copilot? Is it going to be the next big thing, or is it just a load of hype at the moment?
So this is a Skynet question.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Thanks ever so much, Dave. Really appreciate your time with us today.
No worries. Cheers, Nick.
Thanks.